Good morning, my name is Ben down here at Henderson's lineup in RV. Today we are installing the SS450 on an E450 motorhome. Let's get started. So here's our parts from the kits. We have the track bar, we have the frame clamp, the axle bracket, and the spacer for your sway bar. Now we have, first thing is to prepare your coach. We have these Coney lifts, which I'm sure you don't have at home. But the important thing is that all the weight of the coach is sitting on the suspension. Now let's get started with installing the axle bracket. Alright, now in order to install the axle bracket, what we need to do is remove the 2 bolts on each side of your sway bar, here and here. Now on the ground, you can use a floor jack or a jack stand. We have these real nice tall stands here that work real good with these cones. Just want to support the back of it here a little bit so that it doesn't fall when I pull the bolts out. And now this is going to get a little noisy. And as you can see, it's not falling, which would be a real problem. And drop this down just about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch. Give us enough room to get our brackets in there. Spacer bracket goes on the driver's side, and this bracket goes on the passenger side. Now we take a little bit of Loctite. Comes in your kit. There we go. Okay, there's 1, 2, 3, and 4. Put our little lid back on there. Put these bolts back in there. It's always good to leave it a little bit loose until you have all your bolts started so that you don't get them tight and then you can't get the other ones in. So now we'll go to the other side. Hands are a little bit cold, so I'm using the socket and the extension. Make life a little easier for me. Alrighty, now we're gonna hit them with the air gun. You probably don't have an air gun at home, but a ratchet works the same as long as you know how to use it. Alright, now I have the torque wrench preset at 45 pounds. Alrighty, now that they're torqued, take my pen and mark them so I know I got that part done. Now we're going to install the frame bracket. Alright, so I'm loosening up the jam nuts so that I can back these off because I want it to set up in there nice and smooth. We use a little Loctite on each one here. And a little Loctite on these. Usually about halfway up does the trick. We can get rid of this jack stand now. So now we're ready to install the frame bracket. Before you install it, you want to look up in here, feel around, make sure there's nothing that you're going to pinch or crimp as far as fuel lines, brake lines, wiring. We'll put this up here. This up here, like that, kind of like that. Once you get it started, then you can put it where you want it. So I'm going to grab a socket and an extension just to make it a little bit easier to get this bolt started here. There we go. I just snug these up a little bit here. So this is loosely installed here so that we can move it, make sure that our track bar is going to fit where we want it. Then take the track bar, adjust this out So that way you know that everything's going to be nice and smooth where you got it. My bushings are flat against the brackets. Now I'm going to tighten up the frame bracket. So I'm going to take this down. Now we're going to snug up these bolts on top here. Make sure that it's flat, because if you over tighten it, that plate will lift up and then you're messing yourself up. We get these jam nuts snugged up here for now. I always like to fill up in there and make sure that this is flat on the frame, all the way tight against the back. And then we run the big ones in. And those are torqued at 80 to 100 pounds. I like to set my torque wrench about right in the middle, 90 pounds. Need a little bit longer extension for this one. There we go. Now we're ready for the track bar. The washers to keep the bushing from blowing out and to keep pressure on your centerpiece here. That allows it to flex. Set this up in here. Get the nut started. And I noticed on this particular rig that this brake line is rubbing a little bit, so I'm going to just move it just a hair out of the way. That way I know it's not going to rub. Then we'll grab our other bolt and our washers. I always like to trial fit it before I get too carried away. And that's a little snug, so we're going to go a little more. You don't want it to be too tight, you don't want it to be too loose, because if it's loose, it's not going to track right, and if it's too tight, it's going to push your suspension out of line. Nice and straight. There we go. Alrighty, now we're going to go ahead and tighten these down. Alright, so we can get to this one here. These take about 150 pounds of torque, so don't worry about over tightening it. So for this one, you're going to have to use a wrench. So you want to get it as tight as you can, because like I said, it's going to be about 150 pounds of torque on this, which is more than the average person would think. So now I'm going to grab my torque wrench, set it up to 150 pounds. Get this easy one first. So now I got to grab my crow's foot, which is a socket, looks like a wrench, so that I can get into this other one. Grab her right here, right here. There we go. Now, one more step before we forget is the jam nut, and we need some Loctite here on your jam nut to make sure it don't come back loose. All right. Again, you're at about 150 pounds. Now, the last thing we want to do is double check everything, make sure we didn't miss nothing. I just got done torquing my bolts on my track bar, and so I'm marking them. I got the jam nut, I'm marking them. I torqued these and I torqued these, but I missed those. So the small ones are 50 pounds, 45, 50 pounds. So now we're using a 3/4 inch crow's foot to reach up in here on these jam nuts. Now we're going to do the other side. Ready? Alright, now that we have that torque, the last thing we're going to do is a visual inspection, which most of the time the only problem you have are brake lines in the way. And these look good over here. That's your vent tube and your brake line, but I noticed this one right here is rubbing a little bit. In our kits, we get some split loom and a couple of zip ties. Put it over the top of the brake line. That way if anything does rub on it, it's covered. Run this up here, like that. Then we take and run our zip ties. So I'm attaching it to a U-bolt that holds the axle in place, which is not going to move, so I know it's not going to move. It's not too tight, but it's not rubbing anymore. Driver's side looks real good. Now we got the brake line down, and we're back over inspecting this other side, and I got to finish. The last step is to tighten these up to keep it from shifting back and forth. Run them in here by hand till they're snug. And I like to Loctite everything before I put it together. And so this is ready to roll. And grab a 1/2-inch wrench. All right, so there's really no torque spec on these. We just snug them up to where they're comfortable on each side. And then once you get them set where they're comfortable, then you give them a good tight squeeze. And there you go. And so now I'm going to tag these, saying that I've already tightened them down. And that concludes our installation of the SS450 on the E450 Ford.